Hi, and welcome to another podcast from Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. And what I'd like to look at today is something that we sometimes get asked an awful lot to interact with and be connected to clients. That aspect of therapy where people either haven't had therapy before, so they've no real idea what therapy is or what it does or how we work. And that aspect of wanting us to take responsibility for their world and to make their world much better in some way, shape or form. And a lot of the time people come into therapy with this view that it's us that makes the change, it's us that does something, and we give them the magic pill or whatever it is as they walk through the door. And therapy for me isn't like that, and for most therapists, to be honest. We kind of need three things from a client. One is the client to take responsibility of their world, and we need the motivation to change, to make something different, but we also need the energy to do so. And if we've got 2 out of 3 won't work, we need the 3. And sometimes it's really hard for clients to have all those 3 things. They won't take responsibility, they want somebody to fix them, possibly. And they don't know, they have no motivation to change it or to see that it can change sometimes because some things have been the same for so long. And they don't have the energy. Now that's not wrong or right, that's not blame, and that's just the way things are. And sometimes it's really hard to kind of instill those 3 things in any client. But without them, it's really hard for us to work. And a lot of the time, if we don't have those things, it'll end up with the client being not happy with us because nothing's changed. It'll end up with us being frustrated that we are not doing a good job, we are not able to manage that process. So the imposter syndrome process comes in, and I've talked about that in previous podcasts. And so trying to get that client in the right frame of mind, in a settled, kind of structured, kind of safe, secure place in their world and their life is sometimes the first part of any work. Now, if we're working under a contract to an organisation and we're working under a reduced session number, say 6 or 8 sessions, or even 4 sessions sometimes, it's very hard to find a way of making those key components of the therapy, in a sense, materialise, to be part of the work, because we might need to spend an awful lot of time just making that client feel safe, secure, and making them feel settled in the process. So when we're working with short-term contracts, it's a really, really different process to working with an open-ended contract, where the client's in charge of how many sessions they come and see us for, and when those sessions are. So you find a lot of counsellors, when they start working with these sessional contracts for EAP providers or organisation providers, unless they've been given the tools, given the understanding of the differences of that work, they can find themselves really frustrated with it, because the contract doesn't allow them to work the way they would normally work sometimes. And so they have to work differently, they have to modify what they do, they have to change how they present themselves. And so that's a massive part of training, educational training for the counsellor and the therapist. In the differences in that therapy, the differences in how it works and how it doesn't work, and what we can or cannot do. So normally when we're looking at short-term therapy, 4, 6, 8 sessions, we tend to try to focus in on 1 or 2 things that we can make happen for the client, because we can't sort out the whole world, the whole life that they're living, but we might be able to pick up on one or two things that would help them cope with that world and that life. And that sometimes is a skill in itself, finding the components, finding the dynamics of all this confusion that we can effectively do some work with. And then obviously communicating that to the client and getting their connection with it, getting their approval, their kind of acceptance of it, whatever it is that they would like to change. But sometimes we need to bring that into a focus, because the client's world is so confusing, so critical in some senses, and dependent again on how long that client's waited to access therapy. Things don't usually get better, and they usually get worse, they usually compound what's already going on. And so there's a whole range of things and skills and abilities that we need as counsellors, as therapists, in order to actually access that work in a professional, obviously, and ethical way. And the limitations that we need to talk to the client about in that work. Now, if you're working open-ended, then obviously that isn't as tight, as focused, as restrictive, because you are more able to relax. It's not as kind of focused as a piece of work necessarily. So when you're looking at different types of work, find the type that suits you, because for some people it's not helpful to try to engage with client work where you know you're not going to be able to fulfill that contract. It's not the way you work. It's not how your modality that you use transfers to the client. So sometimes we have to back off. We have to say, no, that's kind of not for us. Even though it might be financially beneficial, it still isn't helpful to do it for you, obviously, as the counsellor, as therapist, but also for the client. Because the client doesn't really know what they want an awful lot of the time. And so to try and get that, we need to be mindful of what our skills, abilities, our focuses are. And sometimes that's hard, because if it's financial processes that we're engaging the work for, could be, we have to pay rent, we have to pay mortgages, we have to buy food, we have to look after families. There is a financial aspect to our work, quite naturally. And we're sometimes tempted to go for work that can be financially rewarded because we need it. But that's not necessarily the most helpful thing to do for the client, and in the long term to do for us. Because if we don't have those skills and abilities, then we will get frustrated. We will get not able to function, to criticise ourselves, to make ourselves feel bad because we can't do it. We're not able to engage with it. So when we're looking at EAP work, we're looking at organisations employing us to deliver the work, there'll be some contractual process that we need to fit in their world for them because they're paying us. The other thing that's different in that world is the person you're seeing in the room is not your client. Now that might sound a bit silly, but the client is the responsibility of the organisation. We have some responsibility, obviously, but it's not engaging with the contracts purely with us. We're engaging through a third party. So the person in front of you in the room is that third party's client that you are facilitating the process of delivering the contract. And that can in itself bring some challenges in some ways, dependent on the reporting process, what admin you need to do, what kind of forms you need to fill in, how much of that there is. So if you are looking at working with an EAP contract or an organisational contract, check out and find out what it is they need from you. Not just in the room with the client, but in a reporting process possibly, or in a feedback process, or the forms you need to use that they use. And all those things will have a impact on us in some way, shape or form. And definitely if we have to report something back, because then that in itself creates some confusion and concern, depending on what we write down, what we report, what we put in those reports, and how that information is used. As you imagine that somebody's coming through an EAP that is from a work process, and they've got some disagreement with their work or some process of HR issues around what they're doing at work, or the way that they are working, or how effective they are at work. All those things are going to engage with a different process with us, because although we're separate from that organisation, we are still being paid by them. So we do have, or they do have, an effect on us, and we will have to report something back. So when we're working with organisations, with EAPs, then you do need to look at the other aspects of the work to see if you feel comfortable with it, if you're happy with it, if it's cost effective to do. You know, if you're spending an hour with a client and then you've got a half an hour of admin, that's a big chunk of time, which you're not going to get paid for, I presume. So from that point of view, you need to really be mindful of what it is they're asking you to achieve, what it is they're asking you to do. And if you can do that, then it will give you a much more balanced view of what you're being asked to deliver in that process. It's very rewarding sometimes, EAP work, and I've done plenty of it in the past myself. But I think going into it with your eyes open is a good idea, because there will be other restrictions or other things that they need from you. And from that point of view, then that's between you and the organisation, not you and the client. So sometimes the client has no control in that. And that in itself can raise some issues around confidentiality and those kind of things for the client. And when you're working with all these different types of work, then that variety is sometimes very stimulating. It's very helpful. But it can also be very intense in other ways. Hopefully that makes sense, and I don't by any means want to put you off doing EAP work or organisational work, but go in with your eyes open. What is it that this is going to demand of me, ask of me, and do I feel comfortable fulfilling that? Hopefully you've enjoyed that, hopefully it's made sense, and it's given you some things to think about, which was good. If you've enjoyed the podcast, subscribe, obviously, hit the link, or share it with other people if you think they may be also interested, or look at these issues that I bring up all the way through. We're into 2 years of podcast now, which is different in a lot of ways to when it first started. But I still enjoy doing it, and whilst I enjoy doing it, I probably will keep on doing it. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care and enjoy your life.